point in our scripture memorization series. In this particular video, what we're going to do is we're going to expound upon what we talked about in the last video, which was taking scripture numbers and converting those into words, and then taking those words and converting them into images, and then taking the images and converting those into spatial locations, okay? So I mentioned the concept of a memory palace. What we're gonna do today is we're gonna expand upon that concept. I'm gonna show you guys specific examples on how to use a memory palace to memorize scriptures, okay? So behind me, we've got a gorgeous church from the early 19th century. We're gonna be using this church for our memory palace, okay? So I'm going to be showing you guys how you would utilize certain parts of this church to remember scriptures. We're going to take different sides of the church. We're going to do one side of the church for a particular category, and then we're going to use the inside of the church for another category. So what I would like you guys to do is go ahead and right now subscribe to the channel. We've got more information coming your way, lots of great stuff coming up. Also, what I would like you to do as I'm panning these shots and looking around the screen, I want you to tell me in the comment section your opinion on where you personally would put these images, okay? So I need your help here. I need you to tell me your opinion on where these images should be placed. I'm gonna show you where I would place them, but I would like your opinion on this too. So go ahead and put that in the comment section below, and let's do this. Okay guys, so we're here on this side of the house, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna use this side of the house. We're going to go through a couple examples of scripture. We're going to be memorizing, let's say, 2 scriptures on the concept of joy. So what we would do is we would use this entire side of the house for joy, okay? Now, there's the very first thing that we need to do is we need to establish an image that represents joy, okay? Now, that could be several things. For me, when I use my memory palaces, joy is representative of a particular person I know who is very joyful. But what we can use in this case, just kind of as a common denominator, is we can use sunflowers, okay? So let's imagine, so the very first thing you want to do is put sunflowers in your mind. Maybe where I would particularly put them is I would put them behind or right in front of this door, because it's front and center. When you close your eyes and you see this, you go to this place in your memory palace, you see those sunflowers and you remember this is the side of the house that's representative of joy, and you're going to file verses based on joy on this particular side of the house, okay? So go ahead and imagine right now sunflowers right in front of this door, okay? So that's our very first step, okay? Now, once we have that part figured out, let's say we want to memorize 2 verses based on joy, okay? Now there's a few places we can put those just based on this shot, okay? One place I'm thinking that would be a good place is right in this doorway, okay? That's probably the most unique location on this side of the house I could put something. I could also put something in this window right here, or I could put something in this window right here. Or I could even put something like right here. I can maybe put something up here along the roof. I mean, you know, the sky's the limit. Maybe I could put something like right down here in this corner, maybe another one like right here, maybe another one right here. So you get the idea. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put one of my scriptures right here. I'm gonna file another scripture right here, okay? And the one that I'm gonna file right here is James 1 verses 2 through 4, okay? So it's a verse that's talking about joy during difficult situations in your life. So the verse goes, consider all joy, my brethren, when you fall into trials of various kinds, knowing that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. But let perseverance have its perfect work, so that you may be mature and complete, lacking nothing, okay? So that's the verse that we're gonna memorize there, okay? Okay, so now, obviously, that's from the book of James. So the very first thing that we need to do is we need to think about, okay, what could represent James? So when we go to this place in our mind and we see this, we need to, first of all, establish an image that reminds us of James, okay? So personally, when I think of James, I use pajamas, okay? JAMA, James, right? So they're basically the same thing. So that's what I use. So I would imagine some part of the verse involving pajamas, okay? So we got the James part done. Now it's James chapter 1, okay? So now we need something that reminds us of chapter 1 in this location right here. So what I use to remember this is the word eighth, okay? Eighth. Now, when you hear the word eighth, you think of 8, right? But this, if you watch the numbers video, you'll know that the TH actually stands for the number 1, okay? So TH stands for 1. So when I think the word eighth, I'm actually saying this is chapter 1 because of the part, okay? So eighth, and then for verse 2, for verse 2, I think of the word assassin, okay? So assassin has a lot of zeros, trailing zeros, but then it has the N at the end. So na would stand for 2 in the major phonetic system, okay? Which we talked about. So we have eighth assassin, and then sorry is S-A-R-I. Again, so we have the R sound in there, so that's verse 4. So I know that this is James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4, okay? And the image that I personally created was an assassin, okay, in pajamas, okay? So that represents 2 and then James. He's climbing a tower, okay? So he's climbing a tower, and at the top of the tower, he sees a Chinese woman wearing a sari, S-A-R-I. He sees a Chinese woman wearing a sari, okay? And the Chinese woman has in her hands a baby, okay? So it's a baby in her hands. Now, I personally remember this as a Jewish baby, since for Jewish babies, the 8th day is very important. It's very significant, so that's how I remember the word eighth, okay? So we have an assassin in pajamas climbing a tower, and at the top of the tower, he sees a Chinese woman holding, wearing a sari, holding a baby, and it's a Jewish baby, so it represents the 8th day. So I have everything. I have James, 8th assassin sari, okay? So now what we do is we're going to imagine all of that happening right here. So picture in your mind an assassin climbing a tower wearing pajamas, and he gets to the top of the tower, he sees the Chinese woman wearing the sari holding the baby. Okay, now there's still one other thing that we need to remember, and that is the very first few words of the verse that's going to kind of trigger in our mind what we're talking about. So what I would do over here in this space, so not only do you have all of that imagery going on, but the very first words of the verse start, consider it all joy, okay? Consider it all joy. So we need to think of an image that's going to trigger that in our minds, so cause us to think about those words. So for me, I imagine the assassin at the top of the tower. Not only is there a Chinese woman up there wearing the sari, but there's also a drill sergeant, okay? And the drill sergeant is telling the assassin to do a bunch of push-ups, okay? He's telling him to get down and do 20, okay? So the assassin has to do the push-ups, and he has to kind of push his way through it. So he has to consider it all joy that he's doing those push-ups, okay? Which is hard for him, but you know, he does it. So that's how we would remember that first few words. So we would have to remember the assassin doing the push-ups as well at the top of the verse, at the top of the tower, to remember those words. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. Okay, the second verse that we're going to memorize, we're going to use this windowsill right here. And the verse is Proverbs 17:22, okay? Now this verse says, joyful heart is good medicine, but a broken spirit dries up the bones, okay? So it's a very short verse. So now our very first thing that we're gonna have to do is we're going to have to think of the book, okay? So the book in this case is Proverbs, okay? So what I use to memorize Proverbs, or think of the word the book Proverbs, is a few different things. It could be a barrel. Sometimes I use a barrel for Proverbs. I don't know where that came from. Also, I'll use sometimes a bucket. Sometimes I'll use wine to represent Proverbs. Okay, but it could be anything for you. So now, so now we have to think of an image for Proverbs. So in this case, what I'm going to use is I'm going to use wine, okay? And so we have Proverbs now. So now we have to memorize chapter 17. So using the major phonetic system, I'm going to use the word steak. Okay, so steak has a t and a k in it, so it represents 17. And then onion, we're going to use onion too, which represents 22. Okay, because there's two n's. So we have n, so that's 22. So we have Proverbs steak onion. Okay, now we have to also think about words that trigger us to the very first words of the verse. So in this case, it would be a joyful spirit or a joyful heart is good medicine, okay? So a joyful heart, for me personally, I think of a deer, because a deer is a heart. It's kind of like an old school way of saying a deer is a heart. So we have a heart, and I have in the picture a deer, so the heart, sitting at a table, and it's eating steak and onions. Okay, so we have steak onion there at the table too. Okay, so it's slicing into the steak. It's also eating onions with the steak, or maybe the onions are on the steak, and it's drinking a glass of wine. So we've got Proverbs from the wine, we've got steak, which is 17, onion, which is 22, and it's a heart, right? And he's happy, maybe because it's a good meal. So a joyful heart is good medicine, but a broken spirit drives up the bones, okay? So I would go ahead and put that on that windowsill. I would imagine that entire scene happening on the windowsill right there. So I'd maybe imagine the table there, I'd imagine the barrel of wine maybe, I imagine the steak and the onions, okay? Okay, so now what we're gonna do is I'm gonna unscrew this, okay? We're gonna go actually inside the church, okay? So now that we memorized our verses on joy, what we're gonna do is we're gonna go into the church. We're gonna memorize 2 verses on marriage, okay? So the outside of the house represented joy. The inside is gonna represent marriage, okay? So here we go. Going in the church. Watch your step. All right, here we go. Okay, so this is inside the church here. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and pan it so you guys can see what it looks like in here. It's pretty cool. All right, so we've got this. This represents an absolute fantastic memory palace because you can see how unique everything is, right? Even up in the rafters, everything's like disheveled, everything's out of place. This represents the perfect mind palace because there's so many unique places, even little tiny places like down in here among the rubble, right? There's so many places you could file verses. So I could easily file about 100 verses in here, if not more. You just take the images and you make them very small, right? But we've got this really cool piano right here in the middle. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to go ahead and use this piano right here for all of the verses I have to memorize on marriage because it's so unique in and of itself. It's an early 19th century Kingsbury. I haven't even heard of that brand before, but it's just a fantastic piano. So we're gonna use this for marriage, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and set up the tripod and we're gonna do this. Okay guys, so there's a few places, now that I got it set up, there's a few places we can file our scriptures, okay? I'm thinking one of the places is right here in this corner, right there, okay? I mean, there's so many places you could do it. You could do it right here, you could do it up here, kind of on this top left corner, you could do it up here in the top right, you could even do it like right here in the middle, top middle. You could do it over here in this right corner. So what I think I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put one of my verses right here. It's gonna be very small, right, in relation to this piano, but I'm gonna put one of my verses right here, and then I'm gonna put one of my verses here on this corner, okay? So we're gonna have both corners of this piano right here, okay? So the first one that we're gonna file is gonna be Proverbs 18:22, okay? So I'm gonna put Proverbs 18:22 right here. Again, this represents marriage. I should probably say that to remember that this piano represents marriage when you close your eyes as a part of your memory palace, I would go ahead and on the very top of the piano, I would put a picture of a man and a wife getting married in a church, okay? So I would put that right at the top. So when you close your eyes, you can think of marriage. You can think of this up here in the top, okay? So that cues you to this as marriage, okay? So I'm gonna put my first one over here. So this is gonna be, again, Proverbs 18:22, and it says, he who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord, okay? So again, it's a pretty short one, okay? So we're going to go ahead and start talking about the images here. Okay, so again, we're gonna put this image right here. I want you guys to see that when I'm talking about filing this image, it's only gonna be about this big, okay? So it's not gonna be very big. It's gonna be kind of small. It has to be small enough, we're gonna put it on this shelf right here, okay? So this is Proverbs, again, so we're gonna use, in this case, I also have trash cans sometimes to represent Proverbs. So I'm gonna use a trash can for this picture, so that's gonna cue me to this is Proverbs. And then for chapter 18, I'm gonna think of the word dove, right? Dove stands for 1-8 in the phonetic system, okay? So we've got dove, we've got a trash can for Proverbs, and then we have to think of verse 22. So verse 22 is gonna be neon, right? Because it's got this 2 N's in there, so it's 2-2, okay? So we have Proverbs, dove, neon. I imagine, in my particular case, Andrew Garfield represents the man, okay? And we have, he's Spider-Man in this case, and we've got Gwen Stacy there. She's his wife, okay? So we've got him and his wife. She is shredding papers in a trash can, or shredder, okay? Which represents Proverbs. We have Andrew Garfield in my mind. He's releasing a dove, okay? So it's like a pigeon, a carrier pigeon. So the carrier pigeon is sending a message from him to her saying, will you marry me, okay? So we've got dove, which represents chapter 18. And I imagine that Andrew Garfield is standing next to a neon sign, okay? He's in maybe like New York, right? And he's standing next to a neon sign. And so that represents verse 22. So we have the shredder for Proverbs. We have dove, the carrier pigeon, for 18, and we have neon for 22, okay? And then we also need a few words to cue us as to the beginning of the verse, okay? So the verse begins, he who finds a wife, okay? So I imagine that Andrew Garfield is releasing the dove, and the dove is carrying a message of, will you marry me, to Gwen Stacy, okay? His soon-to-be wife. So that's all you need. It doesn't need to be super fancy. I'm gonna imagine all of that taking place right here on this little edge, this windowsill, this piano ledge right here on the left-hand side. I'm gonna imagine that whole scene taking place. Okay? Proverbs, dove, neon, right there. Okay, so that was Proverbs, dove, neon. Now I'm gonna go ahead and pan this over. Now, again, like I said, we're gonna use this side. Okay, so we had this side. Now we're gonna use this side for a completely different verse. And the verse that we're gonna use here also comes from Proverbs. Okay, so it's Proverbs 19:14. Okay, so Proverbs 19:14. And the verse says, house and wealth are an inheritance from fathers, but a prudent wife is from the Lord. Okay, so we're gonna use this corner for this verse, okay? It also has to do with marriage, obviously, so it's only gonna go on this piano. We would not put it anywhere else in this room except on this piano, okay? So we're gonna put it right there. So let's talk about the images here. Okay, so like I said, what we're gonna do is we're gonna use this side of the piano for this particular verse, okay? So I'm thinking like somewhere like right in here, if you can imagine the image is right here. Okay, so the verse comes from Proverbs again, so in this case, and part of the reason why I have so many different images for Proverbs is because there's so many verses that comes from Proverbs, okay? So, especially when it comes to marriage. So, Proverbs in this case, I'm gonna use a bucket, okay, to represent Proverbs, okay? So we have our bucket, and to remember that this is chapter 19, what I'm gonna do is I'm going to think of the word isotope, okay? So we have ta and pa, which represents 1 and 9, okay, in the matriphonetic system. So we have isotope, and then we have dairy, is what I've chosen to represent that this is verse 14, okay? So da-ra 1-4, okay? So Proverbs isotope dairy. I know it sounds weird. So I'm going to, in this case, imagine we've got our bucket. I'm gonna imagine somebody milking a cow for the dairy part, and the dairy is going into the bucket, okay? And then I'm gonna imagine maybe this is a chemist who's milking the cow. So that would represent isotope, right? It's not too far of a stretch from chemist to isotope, kind of. So, so isotope dairy. And to cue us as to the beginning words of this verse, which are house and wealth are an inheritance from fathers, I would imagine that maybe this entire scene is taking place outside of the chemist's house, right? In the background, maybe he's got his house kind of back here in the back portion, and then we could see him milking the cow here. So we would be cued in, and maybe he's wealthy, right? So maybe he's got like a pile of gold next to him, or he's sitting on a pile of gold as he's milking the cow. So we've got Proverbs isotope dairy. We're cued into the first few verses, or first few words of this verse, and then yeah. So so that's Proverbs isotope dairy. Okay. Okay, I hope this video is helpful for you guys to see the different locations on where to file scriptures. In the next video, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you guys my review system for scripture using cards and how to keep these images fresh in your mind, kind of my daily practice on that. As I mentioned before, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, and also let me know in the comments where you guys would have filed some of the verses that we talked about in this video. And thank you guys again. I'll see you in part 3 of this series.